there's a moment where you're like, I'm not good. Everybody's so much better. But then you have to realize everybody was garbage too. Like nobody was just born coding. Everybody got through the exact same stuff you've been through. Everybody has the same exact access to the knowledge that you do.
People don't realize how far they've come and how many people they've already passed. Yeah, you have to compete with 1,000 people for this job. But what about the 200,000 that quit when you kept going that you've already beat?
So it's always someone going to be who knows more languages, but that doesn't matter. That's the beauty of it, is you're always learning.
What advice might you have for a junior? We talked offline about the idea of solution development versus just quote unquote doing work.
The moment they get anything slightly outside of what they practice, they're stuck. The very first code that I sent my boss, I didn't think of the user. I didn't think of how are they going to access it, what data do they need, how often do they need the data to be refreshed. I knew the tools, I knew how to do it in Python. That's meaningless because it's an unusable product. You can get in a F1 car right now that you're not able to drive, versus having a really bad car that is super easy for the user. The 18-year-old can drive it, in my opinion, a better solution, even though it's not as technologically advanced.
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is powered by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Today, I had the pleasure of welcoming back Ray Ojel. So Ray was on the podcast. He was one of the very early episodes. And at the time, he was a YouTube subscriber of mine who had just landed his first data analyst job, a junior data analyst job. Now Ray is coming back on at the director level after just 3 years. So in this episode, Ray will talk about how he was able to escalate his career path so quickly, some of the key things that he did that were able to make him stand out and also endear himself to his employer. He'll touch on some of the things that made him irreplaceable within his company, which I think is something we'd all like to do. And lastly, we'll talk about some of the great advice that he has for juniors that touch on the number one thing that a lot of people earlier in their careers are not capitalizing on or don't quite conceptualize that is holding them back from more career success. I really enjoyed having this conversation with Ray. It brought back a lot of old memories, and it also is incredible how far he's come. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. So Ray, welcome back to the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast. Obviously your second time on, and a lot has changed since our first episode. I think it was a couple of years ago, essentially.
I think it's almost 3 years ago now. It was in 2020. Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. Really excited. I obviously one of my favorite YouTubers because I learned everything initially from you. So amazing. But yeah, last time I was on, it was around July of 2020. Pretty sure, yeah, or August 2020.
Oh my goodness.
That's been a while. It's almost literally 3 years now.
So for a little backstory, I know I probably covered in the intro, but we started out because you reached out via the comments on my YouTube channel. You were talking about how you wanted to break into the field. We had some conversations. You did end up actually breaking into the field as a data analyst.
Yeah.
And then, we had that interview right around when you had landed that job. We were a little bit into it. Mm-hmm. But what's happened since then? From what I understand, you've been able to be quite successful in your career. And I'd love to hear more about the story of essentially going from just learning all the way to where you are now, where you're, if I recall correctly, leading a team.
Yeah, absolutely. So a little background. Right now, I'm the director of product development at the company. It's more of a software development rather than just data analysis, although it does include a lot of data in there. Quite a big step up from being a junior data analyst 3 years ago, for sure, and not knowing anything. So what happened there is actually a lot of hard work, a little bit of luck, a little bit of perfect timing. So the way my story goes is after I got hired, even I think before I even started the job, I got an interview with you. That's when we did our podcast. So I had no clue how the company, how like corporate world is. That was my actual first corporate job. I had a math degree, but I had no coding experience whatsoever. I was initially going to the medical field. When COVID hit, I kind of started picking up coding on the side, started teaching myself. I used the platform called DataQuest for that, where I learned Python, SQL, and the Python libraries for data, so like pandas, matplotlib, etc. After about 5-6 months of learning, I ended up getting this job as a junior data analyst. My first my first interaction with the company was through their CTO. I met with their CTO. We kind of did a review of requirements and responsibilities for the job. So he was like, it was at the time it was Excel heavy focused, and then some Python and some coding. So we went through Excel questions. Then I went through to the CEO where I had an interview with him. We mostly talked about math, talked about um, random events, and talked about just predictions. Um, and then he really liked me. He sent me out a Python test and an SQL test. I took those, and after which we kind of went back and forth. I got a couple questions wrong, but I solved them correctly and sent them back the answer. After which he hired me. Um, I started as a junior data analyst and stayed that way for about 6 months. Then I was promoted to a lead solutions engineer, and I stayed lead solutions engineer up until February of this year, where I became the director of product development. Between the junior and the lead, it was like 6 months of insane work. So I actually have like a couple of my old emails pulled up. It's I used to My very first project that I got was directly from the CEO. It was about a dashboard for bank transactions between credits and debits and balances. So daily transactions from our borrowers, um, to get some insights and to get some analytics out of it. I had no idea what BI tools were out there. So what I did was what I learned in the class was plot the stuff on Matplotlib, make a Jupyter notebook file, and the way I thought was just I sent him screenshots and I sent it to him directly. So I was like, okay, yeah, done, data analysis done, we're good to go. So I had no concept of like what happens after, or like how does the data be presented, what's the user. So that concept was completely foreign in my mind. And then the first thing he saw was like, okay, this is great, but I can't use it. I'm the end user, I can't use it. So you need to learn a way that I could be able to interact with it. So he put me on Power BI, and that's when I started learning Power BI. And then that was my first report, which was the cash flow dashboard. After which I became the go-to guy for any Power BI data analytics situations. So I ended up building, I don't know, probably 20 reports in that 6 months. I remember my very first presentation on the cash flow dashboard. I was so nervous because all of them were like finance guys. They know what they're talking about, so they'll catch. You can fake it till you make it, but you can only fake it so much, I think. So there was like this great imposter syndrome that was going through me. It was like, I'm not. What am I doing here? I'm about to present to a team of finance people that has been in the industry for a while, and I'm just here like 2 3 months in, and I'm about to tell them what to do with their data. How would I know? So, but through constant repetition, through feedback with the CEO, through just feedback from the team, I was like, yeah, it's actually like the scary part is just the image of it, but actually coming in and doing it wasn't too bad. So then I started committing more time. I would easily work 12 to 16-hour days the first 6 months. And the first, honestly, till now, I still do that. But initially, that very first period until I was lead, my work ethic was insane at that time. It was immediate turnover, um, immediate like learning, constant observing, constantly following up with everybody, like annoying them to the degree I'm following up. Like, hey, do you have a project for me now? Do you have a project for me now? I was just constantly trying to pick up projects and any like bugs or anything that can happen on the side, and just expanding my knowledge. And through that, I was able to learn pretty much the entire data structure of our application, and I was able to learn, just database modeling, because that was a thing I really learned. So then I understood database quite well. I understood logic of databases really nice and how to present the reports. So then I started building the applications that we use for our day-to-day operations in the company. When that's happened, that's when I started. But that's when I was promoted to a lead. That's when I started picking up my own project, designing my own designs for them. Obviously, getting approval for all of that, but I was able to go a little more bigger picture and understand the effects of changing one thing here, what are the downstream effects that are going to happen. And I think that was the biggest transition between a junior and a lead for me. Was as a junior, I was very cavalier. I was kind of honestly disrespectful of company policies and company processes, where I needed to get it done, so I would find any way to get the data, or find like ask around. It wouldn't be respecting the process of like I need approval, I need something like that, which was a big thing for the company to put a trust in me. Of course, was they had to teach me like, hey, you can't just get access to this record. You have to ask for it. You can't just use, stuff like that. That was a big thing that I had to learn. And now as a director, I understand it so well. But back then, I was like, I'm just building. I got the result. I don't understand what's the problem, which you know that makes sense. So then all of it, everything I learned through there. Um, and when I became a lead, I think it was around March of 2021. Um, Nothing too special there. Kind of just kept building my own projects, kept developing my own um, apps, BI tools, everything like that, up until August of 2021, where we decided to make a new company called AIO Logic. Our old company was called LQD Business Finance, which was a lending company. So we actually gave out the loans. We had our own borrowers, everything. So we used the application that we currently have out. Um, to develop, kind of use that company as kind of like a sandbox for our application. So we would add features here and there. We would see what was missing. We would develop it in a way that would help us manage the system, our loans, much more efficiently in an automated way. And then we took what we learned from that and we made this company AI Logic. It was at the time it was the CEO and me and a couple other folks from operation, but from a tech side, it was just the CEO and I. Um, I then around like October, November, we launched like the very, very first super MVP of this app. Um, for about 5 6 months, we were just heads down development mode. He's pretty much on my speed dial. I call him, be like, hey, this feature, what do we do? Solution, going back and forth. Um, and then around I don't know, the summer of 2022, we kind of got to the app where to a point where we can actually start having clients. We got some clients on the application, and now this year we've been in a rapid expansion mode, rapid growth, because our app is doing really well and it's getting a lot of positive feedback from these lending companies, and we're in a tremendous growth. This summer right now has been the busiest time I've had since I've started, and in terms of work, it's also because in terms of work, like when I was solo developing, yes, it was. I got a lot of projects and I was finishing them, but now it's like me with my team, which I have, I think 5 6 developers right now, and they all have the same big projects that I did at the time. So essentially, I'm managing 6 projects, let's say ongoing at the same time in parallel while managing my own. And that's been the biggest challenge for me is going from a developer mindset into a managerial like mentality. That's been the most difficult. It's because you have to be organized. That's the biggest thing on the managerial side is you have to be organized. And um, going from a solo developer, you can get away with writing stuff on your notebook and taking notes and everything and leaving it in there. But as a director, as a lead, as someone who depends on the team, you can't get away with that. So every thought that you have has to be communicated to everybody. Everybody has to be on the same page. Any feedback and everything has to go from that. So um, that's where I am right now. So that's pretty much been my entire journey. It feels short, but it's actually been insane. It's been so through a lot of ups and downs, a lot of hard work, um, and like I said, there's definitely been some luck aspect to it because I came there. I feel like at the perfect time where we were transitioning to this new company, and I was able to prove myself so quick to become trusted by the CEO to be able to handle this. Like director. Like I'm 25. I don't know who else. Like at 25 director. That's why I have the biggest imposter syndrome ever because I'm talking to people who have been in the industry for like 20, 15 years, and they're like experts on their stuff, and they view me as an expert too. But then in my mind, I've only been there for 3 years. Um, but in reality, like if you actually look back at it, like I've grown so much from my first code that I sent to the CEO. I have that. It's just like 2 3 lines, and it was just like pictures instead of now. If I send them an app, it's a full app with documentations, with how to access it, with the full bells and whistles on it.
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is brought to you by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Z is specifically made for high performance data science solutions, and I personally use the ZBook Studio and the Z8 workstation. I really love that the Z workstations can come standard with Linux or WSL2, and they can be configured with the Data Science Software Stack Manager. With the Software Stack Manager, you can get right to the work of doing data science on day one
without the overhead of having to completely reconfigure your new machine. Now back to our show.
Yeah, I think there's a ton to unpack there, but
Yeah.
I want to start with understanding how you're able to progress so quickly through your career. To me, that's something that's very special. Something that really does stand out to me is that, we're talking about how hard you're working. You're doing 12-hour days, 16-hour days.
Right.
And if you think about it, in 3 years, if you're working twice as many hours as someone else, let's say they're doing 8-hour days,
Right.
you've essentially worked 6 years worth of work and developed 6 years worth of skills in that time
Right.
period. I'm not going to come and be a proponent of people working that many hours. I mean, I think that it's up to each individual person to say, hey, this is what I find balance in. And I think obviously you enjoy your work, it seems like, and you've been able to dedicate that time. I also am in that boat where I probably work more 60, 70-hour weeks than I do 40-hour weeks.
Right.
But that's a choice that I've made, right? But it also does pay off in some sense where you reach more career progress faster. You establish better, in theory, relationships at work or with the CEO because
Right.
you've made it clear that you're very dependable. You've made it clear that you're willing to put in this hard work into the company as much as they are some of the time. Because
Right.
if you think about it, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say is exactly right. It's the big part of it is I was going to say is luck is because you can work really really hard at a place where you're not recognized. That's not going to lead anywhere. The part that was really positive about this company is that the CEO is kind of leads a meritocracy, so he sees and values exactly what you put in. Nothing is lost. So the amount of work that I was putting in was seen and duplicated and like announced. Like he constantly emails about my work ethic, about my team's work ethic. He has championships. He has like we have this championship belt that I won where you get like a WWE belt, like there's actual like metal belt. You people must call you champ or whatever nickname you want, and then when you get into meetings, you get this song like champion song that you can choose. So it was really cool. So it was just fun to be like seen and recognized for that hard work because obviously you can only work so hard without being recognized and without like without moving up. So the ability, like first of all, seeing my work being recognized, seeing my work being depended on, and seeing that I can actually have a career path and growth in this company um, motivated me so much more than just being like, oh, I'm 2 years in and there's nothing, no word, like I don't know anything about my job progress, stuff like that. And that's honestly I attribute it to being a startup, and the CEO was just always there, moving around. I was in the office at the time, so he just whenever he has projects, he would just like I was his go-to guy. He'd be like, "Come on, we're going to a meeting," so I'll just pack up and go to the meeting, and then get what I can out of it. And it wouldn't even be sometimes dev meetings. It would just be like random ideas that he wanted to bounce off, and stuff like that. So that's 100% part of it is you know you're right. Like you can't just tell everybody to work hard because a lot of people do work hard, and unfortunately, there's got to be a luck aspect of it to be like I'm in the perfect environment at the perfect time with someone who values my work, and like I'm not seeing and I'm progressing good. I have a clear career path. That even makes it more motivating. When you have motivation constantly, at the end of the day, it keeps you going. It feels amazing.
Yeah, and I do. I don't know your CEO, but I
Yeah,
do have to give him kudos, especially early on in the journey. It would have been very easy for him to say when you were giving him the initial screenshots of these types of things,
yeah,
hey, forget this kid. I have to spend so much time investing on him, helping
yeah.
him improve his skills and do these things. It's not worth it. I get better returns from
Right,
something else. But to anyone listening who's in a leadership position, I think it's pretty impressive how valuable you've become to the organization, to the other company that they started, just from him investing that early time into you. I know you're a hard worker. I know
yeah,
you're willing to put in the time. But if he had nipped it at the bud, where he just completely shut you down
hmm
and cut you out because you were making these mistakes early on, I don't think you probably would have grown into the type of productive worker, employee, friend, confidant that he has in
right,
you now. And so I can't stress enough how important I think it is to develop employees, but also to let them make some mistakes, let them show you how into it they are, and cultivate that type of mindset or experience. Because the little time that he put in to help sort of mentor you in some sense,
Right.
to bring you into things, there's no doubt in my mind that that paid way more dividends than the time
Exactly.
invested early on.
Exactly. And exactly, I give kudos to CEO too, because his mentality is, I don't care if you fail 100 times, just tell me, we're gonna fix it. That's it. That's all he wants is like, his mentality is, we're going to fail. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. I make mistakes. You make mistakes. Just communicate them so we're able to learn at the same time and use it as what he calls a learning opportunities. He never calls them mistakes. He always calls them learning opportunities, which is great because, we make a mistake. He's like, okay, what's the learning opportunity now? What can we do to improve next time? And then that's it. Like, and I've implemented that same mentality with my developers where, okay, you guys made this error. How did it happen? What can I do to help you resolve it next time and help you avoid it? And what can we put systems in check to happen? Because a lot of times, like, it could be easily mitigated by, easier process or better communication or anything like that. Or a lot of times it could just be missed, and then I would have thought about it, and it'd just be even learning opportunity for me, um, to do that. So that's a great point. Is that he just he really did invest a lot of time in me, and I saw how great that, mentality was. That my developers, my first, like my first developer, his name is Ayaz. His he was in nursing school, and then I got him this development job, which he had no development experience whatsoever. He just kind of learned, like me, real quick. So I got him a job with me, and now he's the lead of the client team, because he also, the CEO saw the same thing in him. Was like, okay, if I invest this time, I'll get 10x reward, and same with me. And now, honestly, most of my team is my friends, and I have my brother even on my team. I have three or four of my friends on the team, and they all come from non-coding background. I've helped them come to this, like, company and learn coding and see it, because also, like, I gave them, me and CEO will show them the same mentality. Like, it's not a mistake; it's a learning opportunity. If you improve, you improve. That's it. We want to see you. A lot of times, what happens with these juniors is, like, they get scared, they get, the demotivated or anything. They don't want to, like, reach out to the CEO. Hey, I messed up. Like, I deleted the entire production database. Like, that's a mistake that could, like, the very easily could happen, right? But then you communicate it, then the CEO's like, it's okay, we have a backup. Like, we can just back it up. But then you make a mistake that big, and then you to communicate it, and then it gets found out. That's such a bigger problem because it was delayed, it was not communicated, it caused so much down the line. Um, and that's even happening right now with the clients. Like, a lot of clients will come to us with bug fixes and everything like that, and communicating them directly to get a solution fast enough is very, very important, because you don't want to keep the clients waiting, but you also don't want to, disrupt the development process that's going on. So you want to be able to prioritize everything that's going on at the same time. So that's been, definitely the biggest thing is, like, the CEO mentality. We always learn, we always improve. If you want a course, just tell me, I'll help you. We'll give you the resources. I've constantly told them, like, about learning concepts. He'll send me books, he'll send me courses. That's that's all you need, really. Is just someone who will believe in you and then see what you could be at the end of the day. And like you're saying, it's paying off dividends, because he can essentially hand off the entire development side to me without having to micromanage, like, everything. Like, oh, did this get pushed? Did this, get committed, etc.? What happened here? He can just tell me what the problem is, and he'll know that it's going to get taken care of. Just like he can tell any of my team that I've, like, gone to this point with me, is he can tell, like, I can tell them the same thing, and I know for a fact it'll get done, no problem. And that's really, at the end of the day, the best thing is, like, if you have a team that you can trust, that, hey, the system crashed at like 10 p.m. I need you guys to get on it. Yeah, no problem. Let's do it. That's it. I need you to get on the weekend. Let's do it. So, like, even early on with the development of the, app, him and I were just working constantly weekends, um, trying to get the very initial client on, because there's just the MVP that needs to, like, can host at least one client. That needed tremendous amount of push, and then our client really wanted to get on to see what the beta is, and the CEO really wanted to push that, client. So we were just ended up working, like, weekends for a month straight without any, breaks at that time. But at the end, it paid off to where we are right now.
Yeah. And, I think before we get into some of that other stuff, I want to highlight on the importance of failure within an organization.
Yeah,
I think what you described with failure and accountability, those are things that are somewhat integral to the success of a lot of companies. So if you have people that are failing or breaking things, then inherently that gives anyone in leadership an opportunity to create better systems. So
absolutely.
the way I view it is your low level employees, your juniors, your even mid level employees, engineers,
Mhm,
data scientists, they
mhm.
shouldn't be able to break things that bring the company
Absolutely.
to its knees essentially. And
Absolutely.
so if you don't have some of those mistakes, you can't build resilient infrastructure to prevent that from happening. And if it does happen, it means that you got to learn how to fix that infrastructure that you have and improve it. And
Absolutely.
if you frame it that way, also, it's kind of not necessarily the low level employee's fault if something
Yeah,
breaks or if they break something. They shouldn't be allowed to break something in the first place. So it's kind
exactly.
of on you as a leader, as an owner of a system, to be making that better and some leeway for you know for error, for breaking things, for messing up. I think that's really important in building a resilient organization over time.
Right.
Something that I hope he doesn't mind. He's going to be listening to this, but my editor Tony,
Uh-huh.
uh, you know, to the best of my knowledge, I was one of the first clients that he worked with. He was making a transition from, I think he's working in, something like physio related.
Okay. Like physical
Uh,
therapy.
it wasn't physical therapy. Tony's gonna. I should know his story better, but basically, he was making the transition into video editing.
Right.
I said, hey, I would love, like, let's experiment. Let's see if this works. And
Yeah.
if it, if it works, great, great. If it doesn't, you at least have some real, and I got some essentially cheap labor at the time. And we worked together,
Yeah.
and the capacity for improvement and growth and excitement about the stuff we were doing that he had was unbelievable. Essentially, he was able, I think he's as good as any editor that I know
Yeah.
now. And he's also been working with me for long enough that he knows my weird quirks. He understands
Right.
all of the strange stuff that I do, and he's able to
Right.
work with that very well. The thought of me having to work with another editor, the overhead of training that person, doing all these things, it is very overwhelming to me, to the point that, like, hey, like, I'll give Tony whatever he wants, basically, as long as he keeps working with me, because
Yeah.
he does such a good job to match the types of things that I'm doing,
Yeah.
that I want to make it worthwhile to him. And I think that there is some beauty in coming into an organization early, where you get to establish those relationships. You get to make the, like, mistakes early, where, generally, because Tony was new to it, I was expecting him to make a lot of mistakes. And,
Right.
he made some very small ones, but not
Right.
anything crazy.
Yeah.
And then you get to the point where, oh my goodness, he didn't just learn the domain, he also learned me.
Yes.
And learning me is probably harder than learning the video editing domain. And
Right.
it seems like that's exactly what happened with your CEO as well, is that you were able to learn him, and now you're probably completely irreplaceable to him. It's like having a third arm or something.
Honestly,
you know,
I would like. I hope I'm a replacement for him. He tells me all the time, so I'm happy about that. But it's like exactly right. He can tell me something. He can communicate one sentence about design, and it would just have multiple depth of like what it needs to be designed or developed. That I just understand it and take it forward and come back and ask him any questions. So like he wouldn't need to. A lot of times, what happened early on with his like previous companies, he would have to micromanage every single step of the design, every step of the implementation. He would communicate something, it would not be understood exactly what it meant, and then that's the problem: is the disconnect between like the C-suite, let's just call them, and the tech side. It's always been there, but um, like with me, he's been able to communicate like, hey, I need this. He can communicate the problem, and I can design the solution that would fit his problem without him having to be like, oh, this is how you do it, step by step, and did it get done, and who has it, and that's it. Like um, exactly right. So having a person that knows you that well to know your level of excitement about how big this thing is, to know how actually also like how devastating a problem could be, or how devastating something is, like a lot of times, like if an employee, that doesn't really care about the company, you tell them, "Oh, we missed a client deadline." Well, okay, that's not a big deal. But when you have someone who's generally involved and generally likes the company and loves the work environment, everything with the CEO and its friends, it becomes like a bigger deal. It becomes like you're hurting the business, you're hurting yourself, you're hurting everything. So hey, client's not happy. Yeah, that's a bigger deal than it is, because it's not just I'm keeping the company happy or anything like that, but it's also I don't want to like disappoint or disrespect or make the CEO look bad, because it also reflects on me, and I wouldn't want to do that to myself.
Yeah, and that you just very articulately described the alignment that people have generally in early companies and what
Yeah.
starts to change as companies begin to grow,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
As companies begin to grow, one of my favorite concepts ever is called Dunbar's number, which
Okay.
is around 150 people.
Okay.
So 150 people is essentially the number of people we can keep in working memory.
Makes sense.
So you can comfortably or fairly comfortably be friends with 150 people and keep up with them, sort of know what's going on in their lives. But that's roughly the theoretical limit, maybe 200, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
But in companies, it works the same way where you don't feel it personally. There isn't that value directing this all at the same
Right.
thing where it's like, oh, they care about these people. They're my friends. I want us all to succeed. Once you go past that number, it starts to be like, oh, I want to succeed. How do I get promoted? I
Right.
don't care about the client. I care about me getting a raise. And like maybe those two things are related, but it could be different.
Right.
And that's something you'll probably face as the company continues to grow and a lot of these things happen. But I think one of the major things that I try to do with any of the businesses I'm in is figure out how to keep the community tight knit like that, whether it's having different teams, whatever it
Yeah.
might be.
I
But
For
before,
me,
oh, go ahead.
sorry, for me that what I exactly I started um I kind of started to avoid that, or try to avoid that, by hiring my friends, like I said, and my brother. And I only have so many friends, like you said. I don't have 150 friends. So I've started. We've had developed, like, have hired developers outside of my friend group and everything. But now it's like I've put in. I'm in the exact same boat. I put in so much time and development and effort into training and helping these developers. But now they're becoming leads. They're becoming their own team leads. They're no longer on my team per se. Like I said, my friend Ayaz, um, he became the lead of the client side. From because he was my junior developer, and now he's the client lead side. But now he doesn't handle as much development. But he was my number two, so I could go the same way my CEO would come to me. I would go to him. And now it's like I have to develop a whole new relationship with someone else. But it's actually really cool, because now it's still really small. So I'm developing that same relationship, and these new developers I'm hiring are amazing. I'm like, they're so good. Their accountability is amazing, and I love that about it.
So, what is the anatomy of those relationships where you can find someone who is completely dependable? You can sort of outsource some of your brain bandwidth to them. I find that those types of people very difficult to find.
Yeah.
And as an employee, for example, how do you create that relationship with your boss? How do you create that relationship with the CEO? Because to
Right.
me, those are the types of relationships that have a disproportionate positive outcome on your career. And I don't think that there's any roadmap necessarily for that. So, would it be possible for us to try to figure out what that
Yeah.
roadmap might be?
So I mean, from what because I've been thinking about that lately too. Is honestly, it's just it doesn't matter the skill set at all of the person that you're hiring. Just so you can forget about that, because skills can be learned. It's about the mentality that they're going to be putting in the same, if not more, amount of work than you are, knowing that you're also putting in that time. So it's like a symbiotic relationship. Like CEO, he works more than me. I work more than my developers. They try to work the same amount as us, but they see us working that time, so they're kind of motivated to, like, hey, they work this hard. I'm gonna work this hard to show them I can do that. So that they're like, there's just a symbiotic relationship that we push them, they push us, because we don't want, also we don't want to be bad for the juniors. We want to set a good example, and we want to sit like, hey, we're organized, we're planned, we work this. And then they also want to be, hey, they're actually working really hard. They're not just, hey, giving us orders and then backing off. No, if they're gonna work weekends, if they're gonna make me work weekends, they're gonna work with me. And a lot of times, like, that's the thing. A lot of times I'll tell them to help me work weekends. I wouldn't even need to work weekends. I'm with them, but they're like, no, we got it. And I'm like, that's amazing. And to find that is really really hard. It's kind of like, I don't know. It's, you have to have the person with the right mentality. It's unfortunately, you can't do it for every employee. That's true. You have to find someone who's actually dedicated, who's going to put in this time, which is very very tough. something the CEO always tells me is he's hired thousands of employees throughout this course of his career, and there's only like people he can count on two hands that he will like. If he had them, he will have the best company in the world. So that's his mentality. But from a junior perspective, it's honestly I don't think it's fair to put out on a junior. It's the juniors has got to have determination, has got to have hard work ethic and everything and curiosity. But if the leadership is not in that mentality to lead and mentality to help the juniors, then it's kind of pointless. So, like I said, it always has to be a symbiotic relationship, but it kind of has to start with the lead, the leads of the company, because they're the ones who are going to be bringing on the juniors, and then if the leads are good, the juniors will be good as well. If you have that relationship, but you really kind of can't start with um, like like I said, you can be the hardest worker person in the room, and no one knows you work hard. It's pointless. You need a lead that actually can see you and help you grow. But you can also have a great lead, but have an employee that doesn't work hard and doesn't appreciate it and clocks out at 5. It's not going to work. So you need best of both worlds. Everything needs to be perfect. Everything needs to be compatible together for it to be work. And that even makes it harder because like not only is it hard to find good employees, it's also hard to find good managers. And then putting them together, you're reducing the probability of that happening a lot. And honestly, that's you kind of have to go. You got through a lot of trial and error to find that. And that's the unfortunate reality. Is like you have to have quick turnover. Like you have to have
Yeah.
turnover. You have to test out people. You have to see what they're made of, and if it doesn't work out, you can't have too hard feelings about it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think on the other hand, you know, a lot of people aren't willing to put in that extra time. And I also don't think that that's necessarily bad, right? I think that
Absolutely.
for people, if like, hey, I'm not that excited about this problem. It's a job,
Yeah.
but I'm doing a good job.
Yeah.
That's not the end of the world. But those people probably aren't going to advance in their career as quickly as, for example, you did. Like they will, they might have career
Right.
success. But I think one of the most important things is organizationally, if you're like, hey, this is how we do work. If this is something you're into, great. If it's not something you're into, that's okay too, but it's probably not a great fit.
Yep.
I don't see any issues with that. I think if the expectations are not clear and people are expected to work weekends and do all these types of things, that's inherently problematic.
Of course.
But, you know, if you're thinking about how do you really get 6 years of experience in 3 years, you work 6 years worth of hours in
exactly.
3 years, right?
Yeah.
And so,
I was gonna say, yeah, it's that it's exactly right. You have to have the expectation coming in. Like if I'm coming in expecting to have a scarcity job that I come in, clock in at 9, clock out at 5, I have the right to do that. I want to be comfortable. I want to have a work-life balance. That's perfect. That's amazing. But I came into a startup company knowing full well how the amount of hard work is going to be. But it's also you have to recognize it's always going to be chaotic coming into a startup. So we do communicate that up front. We're like, hey, this is a very fast-paced environment. This is going to be very, very hard. It's going to be challenge you. It's going to break you. It's going to, it's hard. And a lot of employees, yeah, they're like, that's not a good fit, and that's perfectly okay. You move on, until you find a good fit.
Yeah, and you know, I think you also have to have either love for your team or love for the mission of the organization. You know, I was working at a company when I was in Chicago, and I started at the same time as this other guy.
Okay.
And this other guy, his name's Matt. He might even listen to this, but I hope he's all right with this. But basically, Matt was willing to stay late at work every day. He was willing to do everything for the CIO, for the COO, for these people. He was their go-to guy, and he was willing to be around. He clearly worked just as hard as they did, and he progressed through the company very fast. I, on the other hand, I was not willing to do that. You know, I personally don't like company politics. I don't like the idea that, hey, I have to be in the office when I could be doing this work from home.
Yep.
And it's funny, in that setting, I obviously didn't grow as fast because I wasn't willing to take those steps. On the other hand, when I work for myself, when I do these other things, I work incredibly hard, right? Because I see the value in what I'm doing. I really get it. And I'm willing to be that guy for any of the other businesses that I have.
Yeah.
But when I didn't feel that sense of ownership, I just didn't feel the desire to really push that hard, because
realistically, what is the upside for me in the short medium term? Is am I going to get equity? Am I going to get these things? That wasn't in the picture for me.
Yeah.
And it might be a little selfish, greedy-ish way of looking at it. I think that company had passed Dunbar's number, so it wasn't unreasonable.
Makes sense.
But to be able to see the impact of your work and be able to get that feedback is something for me that I could not be willing to put in those extra hours, be willing to sacrifice whatever it was that I had outside to do that, because I didn't see the like calculus did not add up for me to be willing
Yep.
to put in that time. And
Yep.
I think for different people that calculus is different, but I also think if you're earlier in your career, sometimes the returns of that can pay dividends big time,
Absolutely.
and it clearly hasn't in your case as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I definitely agree. It's also just, it's not also just about working for yourself or having a product ownership. It's really about, like you said, it's about the love either for your team or the product or the mission of the company. And if you can, if you love both, that's amazing. That's great. It's well, my case, but you can really love the team that you're working on, and that's it. You can have this amazing team and love being there and love showing up and love everything and drive you, or you can really love the company, love the mission of the company, and that will drive you as well. For me, I don't necessarily have to have the ownership part of it to be um, like motivated, because as a junior, I was really already motivated for. I love doing it. I love solving problems. I love just like putting some stuff on the page and then a beautiful solution would come out and designing solutions. So that's what drove me personally. Um, and then that also, in a funny way, ended up making me like, oh, I like may ended up having me remove all the negative aspect of it. Like I had to come in the office early on for 6 months, but then after a lead and after I was trusted, I've been working from home since then. So a lot of these issues that I've had and a lot of the communications that I could freely have up with the CEO, be like, hey, I need you to come to the office today. I can call him and hey, be like, hey, I actually have to do this, and then ability to I also have control of my time. I I could just call him up, be like, hey, I have to go right now. I have to do this. I have to do that. It's no problem. Versus like you said, it's a company politics. Like, hey, I have to put in time request, and I have only this time. So it's a little bit of suffering in the beginning, but then, like you said, at the end of the day, it's gonna pay off. Because especially as a
Yeah.
junior, your whole career is in front of you.
So I think we sort of been beating around it, but
Yeah.
what advice might you have for a junior? We talked offline about the idea of solution development versus essentially just quote unquote doing work.
Right.
How does that fit into how people can help themselves early on?
So the biggest thing for me that I like was like a shock when I first got hired was how different it is that like coding courses that I took versus actual development and solution design. So I'll give you an example. The first, like I was just talking about, the very first code that I sent my boss, I didn't think of the user. I didn't think of how are they going to access it, what data do they need, how often do they need the data to be refreshed. I just thought this is the data set. It's perfect as a screenshot. I'll send it to them and done. I knew the tools. I knew how to do it in Python, but then that's meaningless because it's an unusable product. It's like I said, you can get in a F1 car right now that you're not able to drive versus having a really bad car that is super easy for the user. The 18-year-old can drive it. Then that's in my opinion, a better solution, even though it's not as technologically advanced. And then um, so that's really my biggest thing is like they teach you in those coding boot camps the fundamentals of coding in one language. So they teach you this is a variable in Python, this is a for loop in Python, this is a list in Python, and then this is how you do everything in Python, which is fair. Like you need to learn the skills, but I didn't conceptualize what a loop was. I didn't conceptualize what a list was or what a variable was. I knew obviously variable from math, but like understanding what a variable is or what a pandas data frame is or anything like that is going to transcend the coding language that you go to. Like right now, I know the purpose of for loop, for example, is to apply to go through every single one of those in the list items and then do something if you want to every item in the list, right? I don't know how to do that in C or Java or anything like that, but I know if I get a list, I need to loop over it to get my result. I can tell any developer in any language to do that, and they would be able to do it, even though I don't know how to do it. But I'm able to communicate what I want out of it, knowing the solution design of it. And that's the biggest thing is like I think junior developers should start learning the fundamentals of coding. Like what is a variable? What does it really mean? What is it storing? What happens? What is it for loop? Why is a list like this? Why everything like that? Why is what's a while loop? What's a for loop? What's the difference? Um, and then that will help them then kind of get tools in their toolbox and build intelligence rather than memorizing like these leak code problems and practicing so on and so forth. Because the moment they get anything slightly outside of what they practice, they're stuck. They have with like a lot of them will just freeze. They have no clue what to do. Versus a solutions person will get across the problem and analyze it outside of the code. Like you can analyze any code problem and solve it outside of code. It's just math. It's just logic at the end of the day. And translating it to code, that's not as hard.
ChatGPT can do that now.
Right. It's like not as hard. Like, so that's exactly right. Like a developer is ChatGPT, but you have to be able to tell ChatGPT what you want. How do you tell it what you want? You have to understand the fundamentals of coding. You'd be like, okay, I have this list. I want you to loop over it. If you just give a list to ChatGPT, you're like, okay, what am I doing with this list? Am I multiplying by 5? What am I doing? We don't know, but and you can it can still give you the very good design that is completely useless that you didn't ask for. It can give it a list and can give you a number at the end of it or sum them up, and you're like, wait, I didn't want to sum them. I actually wanted to multiply them or whatever. So it's exactly right. It's like ChatGPT is the developer and like the developer that we learn on these coding boot camps is like this is how you do it X, Y, and Z. But then the person typing into ChatGPT is the junior should aim to be, is the person who should be able to design a solution, to conceptualize what's going to happen. And the way I do that personally, um, I know you said you like doing by trial and error, but I personally like to start, and this company thing that we learned, the CEO taught me as well, like we start with a user. How is the user going to interact with this? How is the user going to, what data and information do they need to get it? How are they going to get that data? What's going to happen? Is it easy to follow? And then you kind of break it down to such a small, like step-by-step process that even ChatGPT will understand. If so, you're like, okay, I want the user to click this button, and then a pop-up page will happen, and then there's going to be a drop-down here. This drop-down will have this information filtered by this criteria or whatever. So then okay, I need a page, I need drop-down, I need this data. Okay, what fields go into this drop-down? We need the field definitions. We need the logic for those fields. What kind of filter does it need to be? Does it need to be sorted? There's just that one field on the page can have so many questions. You can have like an entire design document for that one field that you like. That's it. You do that for one field. You do that for another. You do that for the page. Page, for example. You have to have the URL. You have to have the sizing of the page. You have to have like the correct UX of the page. You can't just build any UI that doesn't match with the app. You have to write the right spacing, everything. So that alone is its own thing. So then you keep going. You go, okay, the button that needs to click. How easy is it like to click? Is it just a button on the page, or do they have to kind of go to settings and go to here and then click the button? So you start with a user, and everything else falls into place. You think about it as a user, and you kind of do this every day in your everyday life. Like you're following a recipe. It's a step-by-step process to do it. You're unloading the dishwasher. You're not randomly putting. You're not. I'm taking the plates and just putting them all in the cabinets. You're okay. Forks go here, spoons go here. I need to make sure everything is dry. I need to empty the dishwasher, so like that. So that everything is a process in life that we just kind of, it becomes a habit in our life. We don't realize it, but it's our mind just inadvertently doing the process for us with low energy.
Yeah. So, this might be one of the more important things I say is a framework that I literally sort of just thought of as I was gleaning what you were saying.
Yeah.
But I get so many questions about, is theory important?
Yeah.
And I usually say implementation is more important than theory.
Yeah.
So implementation is just the coding, right?
Yep.
Oh, if I can code, then I can build things. And from building things, I can sort of start to understand theory.
Yeah.
But there's a major missing piece that isn't included in that framework, and that is intuition, which goes sort of in the middle of those two types of things. And what I think you're describing is intuition around why we do things.
Yes.
So implementation is how do we build it? Theory is what is it that we're building? And intuition is why are we doing this? And I
Yes.
think that what so many people early in their career are missing is that why, because
Yeah.
that why helps inform the other things. So, for example, I don't think theory is as important as intuition, because between intuition and implementation, you can build something and you understand why you're building it.
Yeah.
What you're building or the specifics of what's underneath that can sort of be abstracted away. And I think that in data science, that's really what it's all about is how do we build it and why are we building it? What are
Yeah.
the implications of building it this way? Do we use this model? This model is non-linear and it handles
Exactly.
these edge cases better. That's why we're doing it
Exactly.
that way.
Exactly. Like
And so,
early on in data science, sorry to interrupt you, is exactly right. Is like you have all these algorithms that are like there's just so many algorithms that will do anything you want it to do. But knowing which algorithm to use is the most difficult part of the entire
and
operation.
it's way more important than knowing how to implement each of the
Yeah.
algorithms from scratch.
Or knowing the math behind the like, okay, I can't make you any of these like KNN algorithm or anything like that. I don't know the math. I can read them. I'll never be able to understand it, even though I'm a math major. But like, I don't need to. I'm not in that field. But I also don't need to know. I also don't really need to know. All I need to know is just how to implement them. Like, hey, I have this data set that I need to find correlation. Which model am I going to use? Or I have this um, grouping that I need to find the combination between. Which model am I going to use? So that's exactly right. Is knowing which one to use when is the ultimate thing that you can do as a developer to help you transcend your career. Is to make it even in simpler terms. Is we want to put up a drywall on the wall. We're just building a house. You need to know that you need to hammer on nails into the drywall to keep it on. Why? Because else it'll fall. Why can't you use this? You can potentially use this other solution, but you only know how to hammer nails. But someone else may know how to glue it on really well, so they may do it that way. Um, but knowing that I need to put this drywall on, that's the why of it. It's like I need to know which model to use, which tool to use, how to use it correctly. It's not as important because you can look it up. How do I use a hammer? 2-second thing. But knowing that I need to use a hammer to hammer something in is a completely different problem.
yeah, and, something that I think people conflate is they believe that theory is intuition.
Yeah,
And the reason that you learn theory is to help develop intuition. But theory in and of itself isn't overwhelmingly valuable in real work. I think theory for
I
people
agree.
doing progressive work and research and a lot of these types of things, it's very important because
I agree.
the finiteness and the edge cases of what you're doing, they're very dependent on the structures that you use. But
Absolutely.
in building solutions, the biggest value of theory is helping you to understand intuition. And in my opinion, you can develop intuition without necessarily having the best grasp of theory at all. So I think that, I would tell everyone focus on building that intuition. And I think you can build intuition just like you were describing, essentially profiling and asking questions about real world scenarios. I also think building projects. I've more recently converted to recommending people to build products rather than projects
Right.
because products have an end user and that
Right.
elicits some of the feedback and those types of things. So I really like what you're sort of describing there is that, hey, we the biggest missing piece, and these are now in my words, just re-articulating what you were
Yeah.
saying, is that intuition and building that intuition. And there's
Absolutely.
multiple ways to go about that.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. I don't believe theory is too much of it. Like you can't really spend like so much time like learning. You can dig into just variables for a whole month just learning about variables and which memory allocations go here and which like that's never gonna be like most of the tools nowadays will figure out memory allocation for you. So why would you bother unless you're actually going to like the like the perfect optimization or like you're going to like a stock market uh, application. I don't know, but you're never gonna like realistically use all this level of depth. But you do need to know what a variable is exactly, and you do need to know how to write a variable. So there's two, but then you need to know when to use a variable, and that's what you're talking about is the intuition part that connects both of them together.
I loved that memory allocation description or analogy because that's something, in C, you have to allocate memory. You use
Yeah,
malloc, it's a pain in the ass.
yeah,
And in Python, you don't, it's abstracted away.
yeah,
The thing that you probably should know is that memory is handled in some way. And you might
exactly.
want to know how memory is handled if you're doing certain applications.
Yeah,
But to actually know and be able to implement or change how memory is allocated in Python for 99% of people is not going to be overwhelmingly useful.
right.
And so why would you really focus on learning that when just understanding that the idea that memory in Python is going to be handled differently than in C is what gets you 80% of the way there. I
There you
mean,
go. Exactly.
I might beat this to death, but I'm a huge proponent of the Pareto principle. The 80-20
Right.
rule is that you focus on the 20% of things that have the most return or the greatest proportion of impacts on the outcome.
Yeah.
And sitting there studying how all of the machine learning algorithms work and figuring out exactly, again, how memory is allocated or any of these types of things, those are not in the 20% of things that have the greatest return. It's
Right.
it's not to say don't do them, if you're really interested in it, whatever it might be. But if
Yeah.
you're thinking about the impact on your career, your value as a data scientist, a lot of these types of things, those aren't going to be the things that carry you the furthest. There's going to be some of the other things. Intuition is probably a really big
Yes.
factor in that 20%.
And it's important to note that we're talking about juniors here, right? We're talking about people who are just starting to get into career and start to launch. Exactly, the 80% is going to be different until like you're eventually going to be so familiar with that 80%, and you're going to progress in your career. You're going to run into situations where you need that 20%, but that's going to be so easy to learn at the spot because you already have such a strong foundation with that 80%. That 20% is going to be nothing. Like this application, I have ran into so much memory problems as like we scaled up. So I'm like, okay, now I have to think about it in a better way, not just how to solve it. And that part needed me for needed me to learn so much more than I had for that 20% for that 80%. Like I knew how to make the app work 100 like perfectly, but then all right, we need more memory now. How do we adjust it to fix it? And we need optimization of the app, and we need a microservice architecture or something like that. There's stuff that I would never need to know as a junior. But then as I'm growing, and as obviously as a person grows in their role, they're going to expand their skill set. And you're constantly growing. You're never going to be standing still unless you're actively trying to, honestly. Um, so even if you know like the 80% going in, throughout your life career, you're like, oh, I still have that 20%. Little do you know, you're just gonna learn it by day to day. You're like, oh, whoa, I learned this memory thing. I'm like, I didn't know. I had to set up an SQL database from scratch. I had no idea how to do that, and I learned it. And I'm like, okay, there's guides here and there, and there's some super specific stuff that I needed to learn, but in the end, it worked. And then we needed more optimization for the database. Yeah, we'll learn it here. We're like, okay, so that's exactly right. It's like for juniors, is that 80% is so important. You can get that 20% later.
Yeah. Well, I view that 20% as coming from the forcing function of the inertia of your career. And that sounded
Yeah.
really complex.
Yeah.
But the idea is that your career, because of your focusing on the 20% that's most important,
Right.
it's going to push you into places where you have unique experiences.
Right.
And when you reach and push up against an edge case, when you're doing really cool work, then that's the time to learn
Exactly.
that new stuff, right? You're
Exactly.
forced into that scenario where you have to learn it. That is a
Exactly.
great time to be able to learn it. The other stuff that your career, your work, whatever it doesn't push you into,
We never use
probably
it.
not worth it to learn. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you won't use it unless there's a specific edge case that's, again, being forced by your career trajectory or whatever. Maybe
Right.
unless you're super interested in learning them, totally fine. I'm never
Absolutely.
gonna be a proponent of not learning
Yeah.
something that you're interested in.
Yeah.
But I think that people invert that and they think, oh, I have to learn everything. It's like, no, just learn the most important things. And then when you run into an obstacle that you don't know, learn that and let it sort of be a greedy algorithm to guide you.
Was it you that said that we go from knowing like there's like the stages of being a developer? It was you. I think it was one of your oldest video, like older videos, was like you go from a stage of not knowing how big this world is, like the development world is, to a stage of kind of knowing code and then but still not knowing, but then you know code and you know how big this world is, like the development, and you're like, I don't know anything anymore, and then you kind of slightly know, and then you're still aware of how big, like as you're developing, as was personally for me, is like I would go down these like coding websites and I'd just find these amazing solutions. I'm like, these guys have been developing for 10, 15 years. I'll never be able to get that. right, exactly. But then that's the scariest part about coding, in my opinion. Like learning to code is you're like, I'm never gonna get there. These people have been there forever. I'm never gonna be able to do this. It's so demotivating. Not gonna lie, it's very demotivating. But then eventually it just clicks. Eventually you're like, I can read their code. I can write their code. I don't. It's actually pretty common, pretty repeatable. And the edge cases that I found, I have not yet to find one that I was like, oh, well, they did it really cool that I didn't know. But then like that's how you can solve it, anything when you get to the stage of like kind of, I don't know, it just randomly clicks somehow, somewhere along the road, where you go from not knowing how big this world is and not knowing coding to knowing how big this development world is and still not knowing coding and being demotivated, but then knowing and being in there and being like, oh, I actually can read it. It actually makes so much sense.
Yeah, it's a hierarchy. It's a pretty famous one. I forget what it's called, but essentially, you start with unconscious incompetence. So
Yes.
you come in and you don't know how hard data science is or how big the world
Yeah.
is, and you're
Yeah.
completely incompetent.
Yeah.
And then you start to develop conscious competence. So that's where most people drop out or fail, is because they say, oh my goodness, there's so much to learn. I know I'm not capable of doing this. This
Okay.
is going to take forever. I don't know where to start. There's all
Right.
these terrible thoughts of imposter syndrome and fear that creep into your head. And then after some time, you develop conscious competence.
Hmm.
So you get into this domain where you realize how big it is, and you've developed skills to be able to work on it. But it's still a very
Daunting
resource
experience.
intensive thing. Your
Yeah.
brain is working very hard. And then the ultimate stage, which I think very few people reach, I'm not in this stage yet, is
Yeah.
unconscious competence, where essentially you can code and it feels, you just know what's going on. Intuitively, you're picking up and understanding everything. You're
Yeah.
able to maybe not write code completely from scratch, but it's a normal motion. You're not having to rack your brain constantly about what do I do here. The ideas come to you more naturally, and
Yeah.
this is usually more of a framework for expressing uh, maybe like physical pursuit. You know, if you think about an athlete,
Yeah.
that progression fits to a T. The coding, I think everyone still has some conscious competence,
Yes.
even at the highest levels, because the
Oh,
domain changes
absolutely.
and all these things. But
Absolutely.
uh, I think that is a really good framework to think about. Think about where you're at. You know, if you're stopping when you just reach that conscious incompetence
Yeah.
stage, kind of have a long road ahead of you. But if you can
Yeah.
get through that, you think how many people stop there? I mean,
So many. Like it's honestly the biggest. It's the biggest place. It's the biggest place where people fail. Is like I've been through when I was learning. I've been through so many coding forums and communities and all that. And then at the end, it'd just be like one or two of us at the end, and it would start with like hundreds. And it's that. It's just like there's a moment where you're like, I'm not good, and then everybody's so much better. But then you have to realize everybody was garbage too. Like nobody was just born coding. Everybody got through the exact same stuff you've been through. Everybody has the same exact access to the knowledge that you do. And you're right. Although like in coding, it's not a perfect analogy because you're always going to get to the point where um, you're never going to be unconsciously competent about it. But that's what the beauty of it is. You're always going to be learning. Like becoming an athlete, realistically, you can max out becoming an athlete. You can only train so hard. You can only push your body so hard. It becomes unconscious, but then that's it. You're like at that point, you're kind of say mastered it. So it's time to switch to a new sport or whatever. But in coding, you're never going to master it. You're never going to be at good at everything. So it's always someone going to be who knows more languages, who knows more stuff. But that doesn't matter. Is you're always that's the beauty of it is you're always learning. There's always this big world that you're never going to reach that like 100% unconscious competence. You're going to reach unconscious in some areas that you're like right now. I do a lot of my coding is unconscious. A lot of it I know what to do with new projects and stuff like that. But a lot of times I'm like sitting down and like I'm laying down in bed. I'm just like imagining the solution in my mind. It hurts my head because it's just like so much mental energy to get to
complexity.
that solution. Yeah, because like, oh, if I fix this here, what's going to happen here? So much.
Yeah. Well, that sort of reminded me of another concept,
Hmm.
which is related to this in a very strange way. So there's this idea of sunk cost. So
Yeah,
I spent all this time learning
yeah,
data science, and I should keep going because I've spent all this time
right.
invested in it. And a lot of people would say this cost is sunk. You should go do something else
Yep.
because that time you can't get anything back from it, whatever
Yeah.
it might be. I actually, in the scope of learning, view it a little bit different. All of that time you spent learning, you've actually gained something from it. You have knowledge. You've gone further than a lot of other people.
Yeah.
And if data science isn't for you, it's a sunk cost. Go do something else, 100%. But if you're still looking at this domain and interested in pursuing it, those are all hours everyone else has to put in to catch up to where you are.
Yeah.
So the further you go in this career, the more you learn, the more accolades you get, the more projects you do, the more any of these other things, jobs, whatever it is that you hold.
Right.
In order for people to catch up to you, they have to do all of that work that you've done, possibly some more.
Yeah.
And you think about how hard it is. It's like, well, other people have to do something this difficult. How many people are going to quit doing something this difficult, whether it's learning, whether it's understanding complexity, whether it's dealing with imposter syndrome, whether it's just debugging code?
Yeah.
How many other people are going to sit through that to get to where you're at? And it's probably fewer than you think. Probably a lot of those people are going to quit.
Absolutely.
And so, rather than think of it, oh, it's all work that I put in, this is my wall. This is the barrier that I'm creating from everyone else, competing against me, copying me, whatever it might be. I look at it in terms of let's say, I have this podcast, right?
Yeah.
I think it's 160 somethingth episode. In order for someone to get the experience that I've had, they might grow faster. They might have different guests, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But in order for them to be in the same conversation, they have to have had 100 podcasts.
Right.
They have to have had that experience.
Exactly.
And that's something that they cannot replicate unless they put in all the hours to be able to have all the podcasts that I've done and talk to the guests and learn this domain. And so I think that that's actually very promising, is that people don't realize how far they've come and how many people they've already passed. They're just thinking about all the other people they have to compete with. Well, it's like, yeah, you have to compete with 1,000 people for this job. But what about the 200,000 that quit when you kept going that you've already beat? You're already in the top 1%. People don't realize that. That's
exactly.
Such a scary thing. So.
Exactly. They do not. It's honestly, even it goes to like across all areas. Like a lot of these, let's say about lifting, a lot of these guys are like, oh, I can't lift like whatever this bench, or I can't do that. But like people who bench like 225 or more are like less than 1% of the people in the world. People are so like, there's so many people in the world. You doing anything just like above average, you're already so much better than so many people in the world that are not doing it. It's just not better as in like you're better, but like you're just doing more than what they're doing, and you're going to be better in that trade that you're doing or whatever it is. Just by the fact that you're like putting in time. Like if you walk every day, you're already better. Yeah. Exactly. You're still doing it. Like at the end of the day, if you had told me that I need to put in, I don't know, let's say 5,000 hours to get to like the director, and then it's like right there, and I'm like counting down hour by hour, it's gonna feel daunting. Versus like every day I'm doing like, I don't really have this big goal in mind. Let's say I'm doing small things every day. Eventually, it just adds up. Like eventually, you put one brick at a time, you have a wall before as soon as you know it. But you come in like, I want to build a wall, I want to build the most perfect wall. You're really never gonna get there because it's so daunting. Like I have to build this building. I have to build this. Like, no, you don't have to build this building. You just have to put this brick perfectly, and that's it. Move on. And next one, it's not even if it's perfect. Just put it. You just keep laying bricks. Eventually, you're gonna get a wall. And your first wall may look terrible and it fell down, but next wall is gonna be really, really good. And
well, you can also look back and see the wall that you've built. I think that's fundamentally what's different here, is that most people don't look back, or they haven't been able to look back and see how far they've come.
Yeah.
Because you're just in a syndicate of wall builders at a certain point.
Right.
But you don't see all the failed walls that people had tried to build along the way that fall out of the profession or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I think people need to. Yeah, it seems sad and soft and fuzzy, but people need to give themselves a pat on the back a lot of the time, because they have come really far. They've already done the majority of the hard work. They beat the majority of people. They just have to go a little bit further. It's like these pictures where you see two people digging holes, or one guy is like a shovel away from finding all the gold.
Yep.
And the other person found a lot less gold, but they dug less deep.
Yep.
And it's exactly like that, where you just, a lot of the times you have to go that little bit further and you reach the reward at the end of the tunnel.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more there.
All right, Ray. You had mentioned you want to show off some of the app that you built, that you're working on. I think that this is totally fine. This is a little different. We haven't done this before. So thank you so much for joining the podcast. I had so much fun talking with you. Where can people learn more about you?
You can reach me on LinkedIn. It is Ray Ojel. That's where I post. I post a lot of educational stuff about finance, about coding. Um, that's my primary place you can find me. So our platform offers end-to-end loan origination, managing, servicing, and offboarding um, for lending companies, for banks, for private debt funds, for credit bureaus, and credit unions, and stuff like that. Um, our platform has a lot of features. Like we said, we have loan origination feature, lead management, omni-channel portals. We have our own borrower portal, customer portal, broker portal. We have underwriting and analysis features, all completely automated. We'll give you risk analysis of those financials, company financials. We have bank statement analysis. We have loan servicing and accounting, automated payment management, automated balance management. We record what are called variable index rates every day in the system, all completely automated. It's one of a kind. Automated invoices. The name of the game in our application is automation, taking away a lot of the steps that are manually done by the user traditionally to make it done by our platform, and leaving the human part to do the checking of the data and making sure everything's good to go and enter the confirmation and approval, stamp of approval on it. Our platform also has what's called the syndication module, which is it's like allows other people to invest in the loans that you have, allows you to put them on the marketplace, allows you to trade and sell loans. And we have our full robust analytics and reporting module as well. We have real-time data dashboard, which is a big pain in the industry right now. A lot of the dashboards are manual, done by a person. All our reports are automated, feed directly from the platform, and you can make your own reports. The biggest thing that we solved is data fragmentation and data manual data processing, and save a lot of times via automation. If we go to our app, to my app, this is the login page. This is our beta environment. So all this data is completely random, completely fake. Here's how we first come in. We see we have our intelligence section here. We have all the reports. We have our CRM module with our campaigns, leads, calls. We have our account management software module, which is financials. You allow locations and bank accounts, referrals, a lot of reports. Then we come to our lending section where we have deals, loan, payment schedule. And like I said, we have index rates that come in every day. We have custom functions that the user can do. A lot of the times they have their own custom functions that we implement. We have the syndication and participation module where you can group, you can sell part of your loans, you can group them into pools, you can do all of that, bells and whistles of it. And then we have our accounting module, which is a really big thing, is automated accounting of loan transactions. So when something happens with a loan, like payment or anything like that, it's all recorded automatically by the system and integration with like popular accounting softwares. Like I said, we have our payments, automations, invoices, received, everything like that. And then finally, we have our productivity suite as well. We have, kind of like Jira in a way. So there's project tasks, discussions, and all of this is beauty of it is it contains all the loan management platform into one place. So right now, let's just think about like if there is anything that needs to be done on underwriting or something like that for a loan, the borrower who wants to get the loan will send information like tax returns, et cetera, et cetera. Then an underwriter will have to look at them, do their analysis, get their bank statement, give a yes or no recommendation. And then it goes to like a credit team who are like, yeah, this is good to go. We approve it. Then it goes back to the accounting team who has to book the accounting ledgers, send out the money, and then it goes to the servicing department where they're managing the payments are being imported, everything like that. Then it goes to the offboarding department with reporting and everything like that. And if there's a market, like syndication and marketplace department. So all of that just to fund the loan takes about currently months. With our platform, it streamlines the process so much by automating majority of this.
It seems like this is a very robust system. I get it why you're so excited about building it out. So, for everyone watching and listening, I mean, I think it's fair to say, yeah, obviously Ray knows what he's talking about. He was able to build something, with his team that is incredibly robust. There's a lot of purposes, and big projects like this carry a lot, or big products like this carry a lot more complexity, weight, systems than some of the smaller projects. And it's important to essentially see, what Ray's talking about in terms of how all the lessons that he's learned is able to funnel into something and create something quite robust like this. So Ray, thank you so much again for coming on.
Yeah.
Thank you for being able to share something like this.